So, thank you, Mom, for the introduction. Be'ez Hashem, today is going to be a different style than most of my other Sifs of Torah. In the sense, usually I speak more about the ideas or hashkafa or philosophy. This one is more in the halacha of how to carry out Chol haMoed on a practical basis, as outlined by Chazal in the Poskim. So the purpose of this year, we'll be discussing a lot of cases. The purpose of this year is not so that we remember every detail or have all the concrete evidence to make decisions and halachic rulings, but just to provide an overview of some of the concepts at hand when it comes to Chol haMoed. Rav Moshe Feinstein, in his advice to people who are not able to learn Torah the full day, he says they should be fluent enough in the halachic areas to be able to ask a shaila of a Rav of how to practice in various ways across all of Shulchan Aruch, across all of Torah. So hopefully today we'll be able to make some inroads in being able to be more fluent in what goes on over Chol haMoed. The Ritva says that the Hachlos of Chol haMoed, first of all, we'll speak about that. There's a machlokes whether the Hachlos of Chol haMoed are d'oraisa or d'rabbanan. This means that all of the activities which are prohibited on Shabbos, in general, most of them are prohibited on Yom Tov, and most of those are prohibited on Chol haMoed. That's the starting ground. The starting ground is that we're not allowed to do work on Chol haMoed. However, there's 7 broad categories of permission, whereby if a certain act falls into one of these 7 categories, which we'll outline in another, then the activity is permitted on Chol haMoed. Now, exactly which malachos are prohibited and which ones are which malachos are permitted on Chol haMoed and which ones are prohibited. So we'll start with a discussion of the name itself, Chol haMoed, which is an inherent stira, contradiction. The first part of the word is chol, which is weekday, and the second part is moed, which is festival. So Sefer Todah says that these days are chol, they're weekday, with regards to a festival, but they're moed, they're festival, with regards to a weekday. And to preserve the spirit, the Rambam says that the Chachamim decided that certain malachos would be permitted and certain ones would be prohibited on Chol haMoed. The Ritva says that the breakdown lies in with Simchas Yom Tov, that as we're going to see, some of the categories like food needs, bodily needs, tending to a loss, will have to do with preserving one's ability to enjoy the holiday. So if a malacha involves one of these categories that if he didn't do it would prevent him from enjoying the holiday, then this should be allowed, as long as it follows certain conditions. And as far as the conditions, if the conditions themselves take away one's Simchas Yom Tov on Chol haMoed, then that's grounds for the act to be prohibited. So, an important distinction to make in Chol haMoed is between doing malachas, which, for example, the 39 prohibited categories of labors on Shabbos, and doing business. We don't do business on Chol haMoed in general, but there's a lot more leniencies for doing business versus doing actual malachas. So when a Chol haMoed shaila comes up, it's worth noting, am I paying for something, writing a check, paying online? Writing could involve malacha itself, but versus doing a physical malacha like sewing, like cutting vegetables finely, like building something. Malachas are more stringent, and business activities are still prohibited, but there's more room for leniencies for a business activity. So now we'll go through the 7 categories with the backdrop that the starting point is that we're not allowed to do work on Chol haMoed. So here are the 7 categories where if it falls into one of these 7 categories, potentially we can be permitted to do the action. So the first category is, we'll go through them quickly, is tzarech ochel nefesh, which is food needs, preparing food, fixing a pot or pan or knife that would be used to prepare food. This is the greatest area of leniency because the Chachamim felt we should have pretty much uninhibited access to be able to prepare food on Chol haMoed. The second category is tzarech haguf, bodily needs. Going to the doctors, Rabbi Heinemann holds is permitted for any doctor's appointment on Chol haMoed, as well as tending to other needs of the body. For example, if the house is very, very hot in the summer, in like maybe Chol haMoed Pesach in Israel, or it's cold in the wintertime in Chol haMoed Sukkos, tending to bodily needs to help one's body be comfortable on the moed is permitted in many cases. And the next case is Ma'aseh Hedyot L'Tzarech haMoed, that if a certain activity is not a food need or a bodily need, but it still could be called a tzarech haMoed, some other need on the moed. So I think like one example would be like my father today was working on a project to fix a chair that someone will sit on the moed. So one could argue maybe it's tzarech ochel nefesh because people are going to be eating food on it while sitting on the chair. Or a person could argue maybe it's tzarech haguf, because the person physically will be sitting in the chair. But even if not, even if we would say it's called a regular tzarech haMoed, then if a person is doing a Ma'aseh Hedyot, which means a simple act, which we'll explain later on what that means, if a person is doing a simple act for the needs of the moed, then this is permitted. But if a person is doing a professional act, which we'll outline later what that means, then that's prohibited even for the needs of the moed. Needs of the moed meaning other than food or bodily needs. The fourth case of permissibility, this is probably the broadest one, is called davar ha'avid. Broadest in the sense of most widely discussed in the Mefarshim. If a person has some sort of principle, some sort of item that's by him that he has, and there's a possible threat to it that he might lose, then under many circumstances a person is allowed to do malacha to save himself from loss of the principle. But to gain something that's out of hand, that he doesn't yet have access to do malacha to gain that, in many cases is not allowed. Next case of permissibility is Pol She'ein Lo Ma'alechol. The basic case is if a person has a job, but if they would not work on the moed, they would not have enough food for themselves and their family for the rest of the moed and 2nd days of Yom Tov, then they are allowed to do work, to go to their job. And a related case is if a person is at risk of being fired for Chol haMoed, he should go to work on Chol haMoed. He should not get fired to take off Chol haMoed. Next category is tzarech mitzvah. There are certain conditions if a person is doing a simple action for mitzvah need. For example, if he's like carrying a lulav in the Rishus Rabbim, in the public thoroughfare on Chol haMoed Sukkos, that would be allowed. And tzarech rabbim, communal needs, communal works projects are allowed to go on Chol haMoed. With regards to business, the general rule is that if a person is going to suffer a loss by not conducting business on the moed, then they're allowed to do it. For example, if a tenant would incur a fine if he did not pay his rent on the moed, he would have to pay more after the moed, he would be allowed. But in general, we say that if there would be business activities which are not for the need of the moed, we would try to push it off. For example, if a person has time to file taxes after the moed, then he would not do it on the moed. As far as your example of collecting rent, so I'll say what I did today, which is that I was mailed a paycheck that I did not cash before Chol haMoed. And I was really davening, I was really weighing whether it would be permitted for me to cash the check on Chol haMoed. Especially because cashing a check involves writing, like signing my name on the back, which is a malacha. But I decided it was permitted because I planned on using the money on Chol haMoed. But the way I decided for myself is that if I was not going to use the money on the Moed, and the funds would not run out in the account, I would still be able to cash the check, and I wouldn't lose the check, and I wouldn't forget about it, and there wasn't even a doubt about that, then I would wait to cash the check. Because one of the principles of Davar HaHavid is that even if there's a doubt that one will lose the principal, even if it's not a guaranteed loss, but it's only a doubt, like in my mother's example, there's a chance someone might get robbed. So even if it's only a chance, a person's allowed to do the activity on Chol haMoed. So knowing that, in many cases there can be a lot of grounds to come up with some reason, such as in my case, there would be a doubt, and therefore be allowed to cash on Chol haMoed. So Mrs. Vassell, in your case, I would say that if there would be some chance that the funds would not be available after the Moed, then I would say it would be permitted to accept the payment on the Moed.
And also, this is something that I pay my bills directly from my bank account, and I get a bill in the mail, and it's not due during the Yom, but it's due afterwards. Is it acceptable to go into the bank and make sure that the check will be sent after Yom rather than waiting and maybe forgetting, and then the check would be late? So, like, to go in today and say, okay, so the gas bill has to be paid by May 1st. To go in and make sure that the check will be written April 29th.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Vassell. I would say the first priority in such a case would be to try to make oneself a reminder. For example, if a person has a calendar that they regularly check every day, to write a note for Monday after Yom Tov to go to the bank. But if it would be a true situation where it was impossible to make a valid reminder, then I would say in your case it would be permitted to go to the bank on Chol haMoed.
Okay, but this is just going in to the online checking and making sure that the check will be issued on the 29th. I'm not touching money, I'm not actually doing anything, I'm setting it up so that the check will be issued after Yom Tov.
Yeah, I mean, your case is a pretty lenient case because going on the computer is not a malacha d'oraisa, it's not a Torah prohibition. And you're not even making a kinyan, you're not even issuing the payment, you're just checking. And so there are four mitigating factors on Chol haMoed, even within the 7 categories of permissibility. And we'll talk about the case that my mother brought up, which is called Kivei Malachta L'Moed. Which will work with my mother's example, right? So B'stama, probably these potholes did not develop on the first days of Yom Tov. These potholes have been there for a while. And the store just decided, didn't really make it a priority. And just on Chol haMoed, they decided that, let's go fix the potholes. And the company is not a tzedakah fund, they're a for-profit business. So this gets into one of the stringencies called Kivei Malachta L'Moed, which means that if a person could have done an activity, a malacha, before the Moed, and they simply pushed it off, saying, even though I have time now, but I'll do it later on the Moed. So in some of the 7 categories of permissibility, this is not allowed. Meaning if a person pushed off the work to the Moed, Chazal felt that this degrades the spirit of Chol haMoed, and therefore, if it was planned work for Chol haMoed, it's not allowed to be done. So, especially these two are a stringency with regards to the cases of regular Tzorech HaMoed. Like, for example, if in the case we discussed earlier, if that chair my dad was fixing had been broken for weeks, and all of a sudden, on Chol haMoed, a person's like, yeah, now's a good time, I'll fix it now. So assuming that's a real tzorech haMoed, and not related to food or body, then that would not be allowed to be fixed on the Chol haMoed. But if it broke on the first days of Yom Tov, and a person needs to sit in it for the second days, or for Chol haMoed, and it's a simple act, not a professional act, then it would be permitted. And it would also be permitted if, for example, it broke on, say, like the week before Pesach, and the person had it on his list, he was meaning to get it around to it, but just didn't end up materializing. So now on Chol haMoed, yes, the chair is broken. So in that case, he would be allowed to fix it on Chol haMoed, because that's not called intentionally planning the work for Chol haMoed. Intentionally planning the work for Chol haMoed means that person had the opportunity easily to do it before the Moed, and just simply purposely push it off to the Moed for regular Moed needs and for tending to potential losses. This would not be allowed. So, for example, in my mother's case of potholes in the store, if the potholes had been there for a long time, and all of a sudden the store decided to fix it on Chol haMoed, this would not be allowed.
A terrible storm happened and, went through the pavement and made potholes.
Yeah, right, that would be allowed.
Yeah.
Right, that would be allowed. Okay, another restriction is called tircha meruba or tircha yasera. According to my chavrusa, my Rabbi Eli Davis, he told me that when we talk about tircha, when we talk about effort or strain on Chol haMoed, we're not talking about, for example, like planning a Chol haMoed trip, which may involve a number of steps, such as looking up availabilities of an amusement park and looking up the price and planning the directions and packing the lunch and driving and parallel parking. All of these steps, even though they may involve what we may call some degree of tircha or strain, is not restricted on Chol haMoed. This is all permitted. What we're specifically speaking about when we talk about tircha, effort, is physical strain. For example, lifting heavy boxes. Like the example in Chazal of tircha is if you moved all of your boxes, or at least some of your boxes, out of your house into another apartment. It is permitted in some cases, but in some cases it's restricted because carrying heavy boxes is considered to be a tircha. So, for example, when my father was fixing the chair, he wasn't physically lifting anything heavy. Maybe he had to kneel on the ground, but it's not a tircha in the sense of an excessive bodily strain that would be prohibited on Chol haMoed. With regard to the amount of tircha, so Rabbi Nissen Dov Miller, who helped me prepare this year, he told me that this means that there's just a lot of work objectively. It's just physically, a lot of, for example, according to Eli's case, it's just a lot of carrying. Eli told me, first, whereas the Tosfos Rid says it's an unusual effort for this action. For example, if there's two ways of performing an action, and one engaged in a way that involves more physical strain, then this is not allowed. A person has to do the actions with as little physical strain as possible to get it done. Now, if we're talking about tircha meruba and tircha yasera, then the main qualification for this is the amount of difficulty, not how long it takes. So, for example, for a person to carry one box, which is very heavy, could be prohibited on Chol haMoed because of the strain, whereas for a person to do a lot of light activity, Chazal felt that was not as much of a detraction of Yom Tov, and therefore, a lot of light activity would be permitted on Chol haMoed. It's not called tircha. So the next case The next restriction is called Maisa Uman. Maisa Uman is defined as a professional act. A Maisa Uman requires training, precision, and focus. So, for example, according to Rabbi Miller, there's two of the parts of the car. One is called an alternator, another is the engine. So the alternator essentially is two screws. And even though a novice may not know where these screws are in the car, but once a professional would show him where the screws are, then any simple person would be able to take out the two screws. Now, my dad argued that taking out screws, if a person's doesn't have any experience at all working with his hands, he won't be able to do it. But I believe for this case is that since removing a screw does not require going to trade school, doesn't require advanced training, it's considered to be a simple act. So therefore, removing the two screws of the alternator is a simple act on Chol haMoed, and therefore, if a person needed to remove his alternator from his car on Chol haMoed in order for the car to work, which is called Tzarech haMoed, then he would be allowed to do it. Whereas the engine, Rabbi Miller felt, requires much more training to be able to replace the engine. A simple person who's shown the steps would not be able to master it. Therefore, replacing an engine is a professional act on Chol haMoed, and if a person just needed his car to go on a Chol haMoed trip, which is considered Tzarech haMoed, this would not be allowed. If he needed to fix his car to go food shopping, this would be allowed, but not just for a regular Chol haMoed trip. So Rabbi Heinemann has a famous psak. Rabbi Heinemann once read a story in a newspaper where there was a certain airplane being flown, and the pilot was unable to continue flying the plane. So one of the passengers, a 14-year-old girl, was recruited to fly the plane, and with careful direction from the traffic control, she was successfully able to land the plane. So Rabbi Heinemann holds from this case that it works the same as the alternator, because someone was showing her what steps to take, and she was able to follow these steps successfully, and the plane got landed successfully. So based on this, Rabbi Heinemann holds that flying an airplane is considered a simple act for Chol haMoed. And therefore, if a person would want to fly an airplane, if a person would have a private jet and would like to just take a tour around in the air on Chol haMoed, it should be allowed. Now, what comes out from Rabbi Heinemann's psak is that, to say a different case, like my father pointed out, for example, if a person would play the violin. Now, playing the violin is not a malacha, so it's permitted on Chol haMoed, especially if a person enjoys playing it. But just so we can hear the idea of a professional act, which is that even if a person would show a novice player, here are the strings, here's the bow, here's where to put your hands, but he wouldn't be able to come out with a good sound. He wouldn't be able to play a song. A person really needs some sort of training from a tutor or professional to be able to play a violin. So because of this, meaning since if a person explained to a novice all the steps of playing a violin and it would not come out well, so this means that playing a violin is a Maisa Uman. Again, playing a violin is permitted on Chol haMoed because it's not a malacha, but just to hear what a professional act would be, playing a violin, according to the way we're understanding, would be a professional act. So, one of my friends, who I went over this year with, Elias Tamarkin, he wanted to argue to me that fixing an engine is essentially the same as fixing an alternator, which is that there's a number of steps to follow, but if someone would explain to you how to follow these steps, you'd be able to remove the engine. But I argued to him, based on Rabbi Miller's psak, that I think that removing an engine is more like playing the violin, that even if you would explain all the steps, you still need a certain degree of professional training to be able to remove the engine. Another example is swinging the baseball bat. Even if a person would explain to a novice that here's where you hold your hands, and then you bring your hands down, and you carry your hands across the body and follow through to the back, but we can certainly picture such a person is probably not going to be able to hit the ball, and if so, he's not going to be able to hit it very far. So I can't say swing a baseball bat is a Maisa Uman, because Lamaisa, at the end of the day, most kids know how to do it, but you can hear the idea that just explaining the steps of a Maisa Uman, of an action, if the action would not be successfully carried out, that would be professional action. So just to summarize, if there's an action that requires some advanced training, focus, and precision, this is a restriction on Chol haMoed. It may not be, in some cases, is not allowed. Handwriting is another case that comes to mind, because the psak is that handwriting is considered a Maisa Hedyot, a simple act. So you could ask the question, well, if a person was never shown how to write, he wouldn't be able to write legibly. But I believe the answer to this question is that practicing handwriting does not require an advanced level of skill, of training. With a pretty basic level of training, it could be it's dependent based on the country, but at least where we live, where most people are able to write without going to special school, therefore simple handwriting is considered to be a Maisa Hedyot, a simple act, and therefore if a person would need to write a list for food shopping, or a list for like a reminder to go to the doctor, or he would need to write a check so that he can pay an expense which will increase if he doesn't pay it until after the Moed. So simple handwriting is permitted and is considered to be a Maisa Hedyot. Whereas making it like a special sign, such as like if someone would want to make a sign that said like Moedim L'Simcha and write it using careful writing, so the fact that he's using careful writing means there's focus and precision, and that's a restriction of Maisa Uman. So even though a person could do fancy writing on food, like if someone would make me a cake and it would say Happy Birthday Yoni in edible writing in fancy letters, that would be permitted because it's for food. But for making a sign saying Good Moed, Moedim L'Simcha would not be allowed, because that's just a simple Moed need, so to speak, and we're not allowed to do professional acts for a simple Moed need. The fact you mentioned that there's a professional tool, that lends itself to being, in addition to being the fact that a professional tool is used is another way that it's considered to be a professional act. For example, if a sofer has a special pen that he uses to write, so the amount of safras a person can do on Chol haMoed is pretty much limited to, like, if a person himself needs tefillin, he can write himself tefillin. But a sofer's work is pretty restricted on Chol haMoed, and I believe one of the reasons is because he's using a special tool, his pen, or his quill, which indicates that it's more of a weekday activity. And the last of the four restrictions is for Hesed. There's some actions which are permitted in private, but not in public. Let's start with the cases of food. Ochel nefesh. Food is the most lenient. Now that we have the introduction, and with what we've discussed so far, should be able to have a good handle on a lot of Chol haMoed shilas. Once we know the 7 cases of permissibility and the 4 mitigating factors, we should be able to attune to most of the shilas on Chol haMoed. And to speak a little further, to analyze the permitted cases. So, ochel nefesh, food need, is the most permitted, even if the person would require tircham ruba, like maybe carrying in a lot of heavy groceries. Even a few heavy groceries would be permitted. Maisa uman, a professional act, is permitted for food, and even if you plan to make the food on Chol haMoed, it's also allowed. A person can do malacha to make food on the moed, meaning a person could, for example, one of the malachas in the kitchen, for example, like baking, cutting up vegetables finely, cooking, separating. So a person can do these malachas on Chol haMoed, even if you could buy ready-made food, like if there's food available at the store, but if you prefer your food at home, you're allowed to make your food. If you already have food, but you want to make more tasty food, that's allowed. And a person can make plenty of food, and it doesn't have to be exacting. So he doesn't have to calculate exactly how much he's going to need over the moed and second Yom Tov. He can make plenty, as long as he's not specifically doing it for the afterwards, after the holiday. But a person does not need to be exacting with the amount of food they make. And with regards to machshirei ochel nefesh, items that are used to prepare food, like a knife, a pot, an oven. So if they break either on Chol haMoed or close to Yontif that you didn't have a chance to repair it, then this should be allowed to be repaired, even though it may be a big physical effort and it may require a professional act. So, for example, if a person's oven breaks on first day of Chol haMoed, they could call a Jewish professional, and this Jewish professional could do a job which requires like a lot of physical lifting and which requires expertise. But if a person's oven would break like the week before Pesach and he didn't do anything about it and said, "Oh, I'll take care of it on the moed," then this is a strong psak, but the Chachamim prohibited such a person from fixing his oven on Chol haMoed. Another child I want to discuss about cooking is gefilte fish loaf. So, if a person is cooking on the last day of Chol haMoed for the 7th day of Pesach, and he's cooking a gefilte fish loaf, so it could be that if he has a small family, they won't finish the loaf over the moed on the last days of Yom Tov. So the question is he allowed to cook the gefilte fish if part of it's going to be for after the moed? So the answer to this question is that it's permitted, because since the way of cooking a gefilte fish is to cook a full loaf one at a time, and it's like very difficult it would be very difficult to try to cut the loaf in half to only cook what you need. And it's also one action of baking. So it's just one action of putting it into the oven and pressing the button or turning on the stove. So therefore, cooking a gefilte fish loaf that one plans to eat some of it on the moed is permitted. Whereas if a person is making matzo ball soup and wants to make an additional round for after the moed, this would not be allowed. This is specifically preparing. If he knows for sure he's not going to eat on the moed, this would not be allowed. And that's as far as malacha. Then as far as purchase,
what about the case where you need it for the Yom Tov after the moed?
right, so when we talk about moed needs, we're talking about both Chol haMoed and the 7th and 8th days of the festival.
Okay.
So with regard to purchase of food and utensils, they may be purchased if it will be used on the moed. For example, one year I purchased a strainer, which we would need on Chol haMoed, and that was allowed, because I'm making a purchase for the need of the festival. The next section is called Tzarchei Guf, bodily needs. As you mentioned, Rabbi Heinemann, Rabbi Miller's Rav, holds that all medical appointments are permitted on Chol haMoed. So this includes whether one needs it, or it was pre-scheduled, or a checkup, or a teeth cleaning. All sorts of medical appointments are permitted and may l'chatchila be scheduled for Chol haMoed. In other areas, if there's a significant disturbance to enjoyment of life, this is permitted. Like the following cases are permitted even though they may require tircha meruba, like physical lifting, ma'aseh uman, professional act, and even if one planned them out for the moed. So women's makeup is allowed. A woman may apply makeup directly to her body. This is considered a bodily need, and hairs may be removed. If a person's house is fully dark or is significantly dark, he can call an electrician to get the lights going. If a person has one bathroom, and the bathroom is having issues, then a person can do a physical act, a professional act to fix it. And the number one bathroom is Lav Davka. One of my Rabbi Cam's, he has 12 people living at home. So he said even if his second bathroom would break, he would consider that to be a tzarech haguf, and he would call a professional on Chol haMoed.
He only has one bathroom?
No, he has two bathrooms. He's saying if one of them would break, he would consider that to be a tzarech haguf. If a person has one shower and they need it, Rabbi Chesed said it could be nowadays everyone is considered to be needing a shower. This probably depends on how frequently one showers and how dependent they are on a shower. But there could be grounds for if a person's shower breaks to be able to fix it. And if a person's glasses or hearing aids need fixing, which prevent it from seeing properly or hearing properly, that's also a tzarech haguf, and they could get that fixed. And again, all these are permitted, even if they require a lot of effort, if a professional act needs to be done, and you can even plan out to fix it on the moed. Like for example, if your glasses would break on the week before Pesach, you could say, "Oh, I'll tend to it on the moed, and that'll be fine." That's permitted. Even though for some other areas, like the next case we'll talk about, planning out work for the moed is not allowed. But for a bodily, either food need or bodily needs, one may plan out the work for the moed. Yes.
Let's say you have an outfit you're saving for the 7th and 8th days, and you notice there's a stain on it. Can you wash it?
Yeah, so even though we don't do laundry on Chol haMoed, but spot cleaning is permitted. Thank you. And one allowance with children, even though we don't wash adult clothes on Chol haMoed, but children's clothes are allowed to be washed on Chol haMoed because they're constantly being soiled.
I can attest to that.
Okay. Okay, the next case is tzarech haMoed. For needs of the moed, not food and not bodily, but some other need. So a big topic that comes up here is the following case. So we'll start with apple picking. The question is apple picking a permissible activity on Chol haMoed? So it should start off that apple picking should not be allowed on Chol haMoed, because the apple picking is a malacha on Shabbos. So the following shaila comes up: apple picking. Are we allowed to pick apples on Chol haMoed? So first off is that apple picking should be prohibited because it's a malacha of kotzer, of detaching from a short of growth. We would not pick apples on Shabbos. However, if a person is planning to eat the apples, then this should be allowed on Chol haMoed. A person is allowed to do a malacha, right? Picking an apple is a simple act, doesn't require tirchas, doesn't require effort, and you can eat it on the moed, so this would be allowed. The question becomes if a person is picking extra apples for the moed. If a person is picking some apples for the moed and some extra apples that he knows for sure will not be eaten on the moed, but he'll store them away and eat them after the moed. So the question is, are these excess apples allowed to be eaten, are allowed to be picked on Chol Hamoed?
What if he's going to pick them and give them to friends, or bake an apple pie and give it to friends for haMoed, or 7th or 8th day?
So if a person is baking or doing malacha for other Jews who have the din of lachen, then this would be allowed. But if the apples are not going to be used for himself or another Jew who has a din of lachen, then the question is he allowed to pick them on the moed? So there's a lot of discussion about this topic, but the view I'll present is from Rabbi Miller. Rabbi Miller's opinion is that a person is allowed to do a malacha d'oraisa, a Torah prohibition, because he enjoys it. He enjoys the maisa, the action of picking apples, even though in the totzah, in the outcome, there's no benefit. So that's what Rabbi Miller holds. Rabbi Miller holds that if a person is doing a malacha d'oraisa, a Torah prohibition, but he enjoys it, then even if there's no benefit in the outcome, this is permitted. Another example is driving. So if a person is driving to the store to buy food, this is ochel nefesh, this is allowed. If he's driving to a doctor's appointment, tzarich l'guf, this is allowed. If he's driving on a Chol Hamoed trip, driving to a Chol Hamoed trip, this is allowed. But the question would be if, like a person like my grandfather, he used to just drive around because he enjoyed driving, not because he's going anywhere per se, but just because he enjoyed the act of driving. So Rabbi Miller holds that driving is a malacha d'oraisa, is a Torah prohibition on Shabbos. So the question here arises, if a person is not driving to go anywhere on a moed just because he enjoys driving, is it permissible for a person to go on what's called a joy ride on Chol Hamoed?
What if it's the case where he wants to bring the family in the car and he wants to show them beautiful scenery, just kind of drive through some country roads, and he finds it relaxing?
So that I think, this is what Elias Tamarkin wanted to argue to me, is that if you make the Chol Hamoed trip in the car, then that should be a tzarich hamoed, that should be allowed. But al kapanim, Rabbi Miller holds that if he would just enjoy driving, even if he's not going anywhere in particular, then this is permitted because this is called a tzarich hamoed. Another example would be if a person is baking a cake, just because they enjoy baking, not because anyone will eat it. So again, baking is a malacha d'oraisa, it's a Torah prohibition, and there's no benefit in the outcome, no one's eating the cake. But Rabbi Miller would hold, since a person enjoys the act of baking, this would be allowed. A person would be allowed to bake a cake on the moed that no one is benefiting from, just because he enjoys the act of baking the cake. So to summarize, that if a person is doing an activity which is a Torah prohibition, which he enjoys, it is permitted even if there's no benefit in the outcome. That's why apple picking, even excess apples, is allowed on Chol Hamoed. But for example, if a person is practicing driving, and he's not planning on becoming licensed on the moed, so if such a person would go on a legitimate errand to buy food from the store, then this would be allowed. Now, if you want to argue he's like practicing the instrument and it doesn't provide him joy, so that I could hear is not allowed. But if he really enjoys the playing and he's trying to get better, but he also enjoys the playing, I would say that's permitted. Another case that can come up is if a person wants to write a card to a friend, like a good Moed card. So, assuming that he's writing simple handwriting, I'm not trying to be extra fancy, and the card will be received on the Moed, or second days of Yom Tov, in a way that's permissible for him to open it, then writing this card will be permitted. I'd like to say a thought about Kavod haMoed, about the honor that we give to Chol Moed. So, the Be'er Halacha in Simin Tafkuf Nun Daled brings from Yerushalmi a member from Rabbi Abba Bar Mama. Rabbi Abba Bar Mama contrasts two different types of people on Chol Moed. The first person is Ochlen, V'shosin, Usmechin, B'ingei Matayra. He eats, like Rashi says, he eats nice foods, drinks nice drinks. He has simcha, and then he learns Torah. That's the first person. Second person is Ochlen V'shosin. Seems like he's eating good food, and then he's pochazin. He's acting wildly. So the question is, what's the difference between these two people? Both of them ate and drank, and the first person went on to have simcha and learning Torah, and the second person started acting wildly. So what's the difference between these two people? How come they had totally different endings of their action? What I want to say, there's a lot that can be said, but one approach is that, like we've spoken about many times in the past, is that if a person eats or drinks al manas on account to bring him to simcha, then this is a good thing. Now, what's the simcha of the Moed? The simcha of the Moed is what we say in Chol Moed Musaf, Atav v'chartanu mikol ha'amin, that you, Hashem, have chosen us, the Jewish people, from all the nations. The special relationship we have with Hashem. So if we eat nice food and drink nice drinks, in order to bring us to this true simcha of appreciating our relationship with Hashem, then the outgrowth of that will have simcha, and because of that simcha, the next step will be is Yigayim B'Torah. We'll go and learn Torah. Because Torah is what brings our relationship with Hashem to the next level. For example, Rabbi Beer, Rosh Chol in Boston, says that on Shabbos, if a person is just in a Shabbos environment, is Shomer Shabbos, then he feels Shabbos Menucha, tranquility and serenity. And then, if a person learns Torah on Shabbos, that person brings their Shabbos Menucha to a whole new level. So when I was telling this over to my Chaver Elias Samarkand, he said it's really another step. There's Ochlen V'shosin, eating and drinking, Smechin, having the simcha of recognizing a relationship with Hashem, then Yigayim B'Torah, then we immerse ourselves in Torah study, and doing that will bring us to another degree of simcha, to an even more elevated degree of simcha than what we first just had from the eating and drinking. So if we eat,
Because we're connecting with God.
right, because Torah is the greatest way to connect with Hashem. So, whereas the other person who was Ochlen V'shosin, who was eating and drinking for his own pleasure, he was doing it to excess, not to moderation, then he's not going to come to any true simcha of his relationship with Hashem, and without that recognition of his relationship, he's not going to learn Torah. The only next result, he's just going to start acting wildly. So maybe Zocha to carry out we should be Zocha to be mehapach what the Gemara in Makkah says is that Mavaz is modus kilu over the Rodazara, and be able to live with Hashem through the Hachlos of Chol haMoed, and ask the shilos that come up now that we're more attuned and sensitive to the different factors that are at play, and when we eat and drink our nice foods on Chol haMoed, we should be able to lift us up to a new madrega, a new level of simcha and recognition of our relationship with Hashem, and wish all a good moed and an upcoming Chag Sameach.